Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Living Well with Bipolar Disorder channel. I have a very special guest today. Her name is Kate Simonet, and she is the author of the book, the newly released book, Out of the Darkness. And we're going to have a little relaxed chat about the book and her life experience. And I read the book. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. And I'm really, really honored to be able to have this discussion with her. So um, this is Kate Simonet. And do you
Thanks
want
for
to
having
start
me.
with, sure. Do you want to start with what made you write the book or what influenced you to write the book?
Sure. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 20 years old. I'm now 27. And when I was initially diagnosed, it was something that was really hard to live a normal life and navigate. And I found such a good way to kind of cope with my disorder, and to the point where now, with the skills that I've gained through therapy and self-development and taking medication, I would say that I live a very normal life. If you I don't know what normal is, but
Yeah.
I live a very happy, successful life and have very little disruptions from mania or depression. I have a really good relationship with my therapist. I've been seeing him for about 4 years, and he made a really good point to me about a year ago. He said, it's great that you're doing so good, and but you have all these skills that you've
Mhm.
learned. Like, what good does it do if you don't share it with the world? And
Mhm.
so he's been pushing me to write a book for a while, and I just thought, like, my story is unique and so many people do suffer from mental illness that I wanted to give people hope and show them that even if you hit rock bottom, it's it's definitely possible to come back and be better than before.
Mhm. Yeah. I when I was first reading the book, it was really well written because you go through a couple stages of your life. You start in high school, I believe. I think the book started in high school and then transformed into this adulthood. And what I really think readers, especially younger readers, are really going to like if they read the book is that when you describe like being in sports and being a student and being a student athlete and I think you really were able to, through your writing, distinguish kind of the difference between, you know, teenage emotional things and then what it means to actually have bipolar disorder or depression or any other type of mental illness and really being able to discern those differences.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that part of the book because it's really a misunderstood thing about mental illness, I think, and being able to identify those kind of key factors in determining what the issues really are. Um, the things I identified with, uh, what I really enjoyed is and I remember it like it was yesterday, is you talked a lot about the risperidol or risperidone,
Risperidone,
the
yeah.
heavy legs, and I'm a runner as well, and the heavy legs from that medication. It was just like I remember I was trying to run marathons at the time. I wasn't in college anymore, and it was just you brought me right back to that time where it was just I mean, your legs are just so heavy. And, for me as well, it was one of the first medications I was prescribed. And so at that point, it was kind of like, well, is this how it's going to be,
Yeah,
forever? Because I
that's
can't
a
run like this.
yeah, that's a hard thing about finding a medication that works for you. It's just like you want to feel good and feel like yourself, but you also, with medication comes side effects. And so it's a little bit of give and take. And one thing I wish I knew when I was younger is, like, you can speak up and say, hey, I don't like the way this is making me feel. I
Yeah.
want to look at taking something else. And as an 18-year-old getting put on medication for the first time, it was like, okay, they're telling me to take this, so I will. And a lot of side effects from risperidone were just terrible for me.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I wish I would have said something instead of having to take it for a year.
Yeah, yeah. That's one thing I've learned as well. I was diagnosed around age 25,
Okay.
and but I had experienced depressive episodes as a child, and so your description of being of having depression in high school was, I think, spot on because um, I think I think one of the misunderstandings about mental illness is that people with mental illness can't do normal things. And I think that's a huge kind of disservice to people with mental illness because we can do things. Like you were a great student, you participated in sports, um, you were much faster than I was.
It's very
um,
possible to be high functioning.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I'm hoping, through these discussions in my channel that I'm able to bring about that idea that you can have, a good life and you can work and you can have a house and all sorts of things. Um, so I really appreciated that about the book because you really showed this progression towards, getting diagnosed and then how we manage our life. And I really enjoyed the very end of the book because you kind of capsulated everything all together and I think described a sense of hope that, you know, you go through all these struggles, finding out how you're going to manage this mental health struggle and then live a life. And I think you really showed in the book a really wonderful, you know, traveling through diagnosis and then how do I do this? Like how do I live life with this? So
One thing
um
that was really like a lot of feedback I've gotten is, and I'm so happy it's doing this, but especially from people who have no history of mental illness, um, it's like, wow, I get why people like commit suicide, or I get why people can't just suck it up, because I think I did a pretty good job at like describing what depression is. And
mhm,
especially in my time in high school, I tried literally everything I could externally to make myself feel better. And I think like by breaking that down and showing that in the book, it really does show you like it's not something that's your fault or something that's easy to
mhm,
fix. Like you do, it's really important and a brave thing to ask for help.
mhm. Yeah. And I went through a period where I didn't know what was wrong with me and I didn't want to tell anybody until I knew what was wrong with me. And so that was a huge struggle for me. And just being able to describe what was going on with me because, especially I think with bipolar disorder, people tend to understand it as you're either happy or you're sad. And there's so much in between.
Mhm.
And especially depending on your childhood and how you were raised, I think that impacts your view of what it means to, have a mental illness or mental health struggle. Um, so yeah. I and also I wanted to touch on the connection between your eating disorder and your bipolar disorder because um, for me, I did experience I have struggled with eating disorders in the past, and um, and it's been really, really important for me to make that connection between eating disorders and bipolar disorder. So, what was that like for you?
I really wish I could fully understand. Like, I think it's so interesting finding out like why I am the way I am. And that's the one thing I haven't gotten answered. I A lot of my eating disorder came from performance in my sports. I was a distance runner, so I mean, it's true. If you weigh less, you run faster. And like
Mhm.
I got that in that mindset. It was all about competing and
Yeah.
being fit and being fast. And I really wish that I would have known the consequences of being underweight and not taking care of myself. But to
Hmm.
me, being thin and being fast, I connected that as being happy. And I
Hmm.
think my most unhappy times in my life was when I was at my lowest weight. And I didn't
Right.
even like my lowest weight, I thought I was fat, and I'm like 20 pounds heavier than I was at that time. And I'm like
Yeah.
finally content in my body. But going back to your question, I really think that bipolar and or any mental illness and eating disorders are very connected.
Hmm.
Whenever I am restricting my food or binging and purging, um, that is a time when I am not stable in my
Hmm.
mood. And I don't
Hmm.
know why that is. I have fully given up dieting. I like
Hmm.
eat intuitively now. I don't have an eating disorder anymore. And
Hmm.
I don't think it will return. But there was a good span of my life for like 6 years where I'd be like, okay, I think I'm going to try to lose weight. And I would overtrain and cut
Hmm.
calories. And then I would have a manic or depressive episode. So I
Hmm.
don't know if being unstable made me like start those behaviors and be unhealthy, or if me wanting to fixate on being thin
Yeah.
caused me to get unstable. I'm not
Right.
really sure, but I very much know that they are connected.
Yeah. Yeah. I've wondered the same thing. Um, I recently, a couple years ago, did have a relapse, and at the time, it was during it wasn't a depression, it was a some sort of weird PTSD situation. And so I was under a tremendous amount of, emotional stress. And I think our minds tend to go to the easiest thing we can control, because everything else was chaos,
Mhm.
but I know how to control calories.
Exactly.
And
I
yeah.
really resonate with that. It comes
Hmm.
down to control. Your brain feels so out of control. You just want something to stick to so that you feel like you have control in your life.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I would
Yeah.
also say that with um cutting calories or counting calories and being deficient all the time, we need calories to be healthy. And
Hmm.
when you're depriving your health or your body from that, you're also depriving your brain. And so
Hmm.
I'm sure having that lack of energy and the lack of calories that's like healthy for you, I see how it does like
Hmm.
cause disruption in mental health because you're not giving your body what it needs. And
Hmm.
especially being someone like who has a mental illness, it's so important that we're feeding our brains too, because I mean,
Hmm.
we need to nurture it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have found that fruit helps my mood a lot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I
I
don't know
have a
why, but
problem. I have a problem. Well, when I was younger, I was super extreme. It was very black and white, where
hmm.
I would overexercise or be like, I'm cutting out sugar completely,
Hmm.
or I'm not eating fat and I'm not eating meat. And I've totally found that when I have like moderation, a little bit of something, uh,
Yeah.
I've been my happiest and my healthiest. And so I
Right.
don't try to be too extreme with things like that anymore. But it took a
Yeah.
lot of practice to get to that point.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to really make that kind of a mind body connection that, like you were saying, you have to fuel your body and fuel your brain. Because if you're starving your brain, then yeah, it's not going to function right.
Mhm.
And if you have a mental illness, or if you're just going through some sort, if you're grieving or going through some very difficult time in your life, um, you don't want to be lacking in nutrients and calories and things like that, because it just makes it worse. And then I know, like, if I'm in a depressive episode, um, if I'm not taking care of the physical part of my body, then it just makes the mental health issue even worse.
I've
So,
I really try to have the mindset that food is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of talk about this in my book, but you really only do get one body, and it's like our vessel in a way, and it's something that we should treat with love and respect. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times people, well, as a teenager and as a college student, so focused on running and focused on being thin and losing weight, like I wasn't respecting my body. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does so much good stuff for us that we
Yeah.
deserve to feed it and take care of it. And even if we're having a bad day or a sick day mentally, taking the time to rest your body too. And that's not anything that I think anyone who is having a depressed day or whatnot should be ashamed of resting our
Mm-hmm.
body, because I think mental illness is very much like being sick physically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's how I've described it because people ask, um, what does depression feel like? And of course, that's hard to describe. You do it very well in the book, in your book, but it's really sometimes difficult to describe because it's kind of like I think a surgeon or an oncologist has to describe. You brought this was in your book, wasn't it? Like it was somewhere. Sorry. And correct me if I get this wrong, but like a surgeon, um, when describing a tumor or something like that, they have to use certain objects to describe the tumor, like, oh, it's the size of a lime or it's the size of a foot baseball or something like that. And so they really have to decide how best to explain what's going on. And that's so hard to do with depression, I think, because it's just, you know, I think we're constantly still trying to figure it out. And,
You can't
and
see it.
right,
And
right.
people
Yeah.
who have never felt it, there's nothing to compare it to.
Hmm.
Like I think in my book, like I said, it's awful beyond words. Like I
Yeah.
people may think that's dramatic for people who don't experience, but um I really it's you don't know unless you felt it. And that's I think where the disconnect in society is like for someone who doesn't understand or has never experienced it, how do you wrap your head around something you can't see or can't feel?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's a really hard process. And it's always interesting to me to meet people who have never experienced depression. It's like, what? How can you not? And what I always found funny is when they talking about the diagnosis is like, oh, well, if you have these feelings for 2 or more weeks, I'm like, 2 weeks? I wouldn't even say anything to my doctor if it was only 2 weeks or, something like that. And because I thought, well, everybody feels this way. And it's
Yeah.
not true. I mean, it's really not true that not everybody actually experiences depression. And so um, let's talk about your mania because you said you were diagnosed with bipolar 1, which typically has more extreme mania. Um, so what is that like for you? You described it in the book very well, but how do you like, I know medications are a big part of it, but how do you identify when you might be entering into some sort of mania or manic phase?
I think that initially it was really hard for me to like read myself. I've gotten a lot better, but I journal every day. And when I'm manic or depressed, my change in writing
Mm,
style kind of changes. Um, it's been a while since I've experienced mania, but I do have to say that I like for a while, like I loved the feeling. I was like, oh, I'm manic, but I don't want to call my doctor because I'm doing so well and I'm being so
yeah,
productive. Um,
right.
and I would explain mania as energy, but it gets to a point where it's uncomfortable and scary. At
Hmm.
first, I would say um, I have a decreased need to sleep. and
Mm-hmm.
become a very big morning person, which if you know me, I'm not always the biggest morning person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard for me to get going generally. But when I'm
Yeah.
manic, I'm up and working out by 6 a.m. And um, I would say that I mean, a lot of people don't talk about this, but increased sex drive is a really big thing. And
Mm-hmm.
um, just being very optimistic, confident, like even when I'm working in my job, when I'm manic, I tend to talk more than
Mm-hmm.
normal. I tend to be more direct, and I mean, I don't really tell people what to do, but my demeanor is different in
Yeah.
most of everything I do in life. And at first, like when I started experiencing this, it was something like, oh, I really don't want this to stop. So I'm not going to say anything to my
Mm-hmm.
doctor. I don't want them to know. But it's not like realistic to live a life like that. And
Yeah.
after a while, your brain does get overworked and it does cause you to crash. And so I don't talk about this in my book, but I've also experienced mixed episodes, which is
Mm-hmm.
mania and depression kind of
Yeah.
combined. So
Right.
that is really scary and
It
uncomfortable for
is.
me. And I generally, when I'm experiencing mania, if it's not treated or addressed, it turns into a mixed episode. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't really talk about that in my book because I don't know enough about it. But I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
like, in my book, I do talk about feeling the need to move around
Mm-hmm.
and being very uncomfortable. And I didn't know if that was because of the risperidone and the need to
Oh.
move, or if that was like a mixed episode and I was having like nightmarish thoughts, but I also like couldn't sit still. That's kind of what I think of when I think of a mixed episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned that if I'm manic, okay, you need to be responsible,
Yeah.
call your doctor. And also when I'm manic, I know some people spend a lot of money. I
Mm-hmm.
have a habit of like going out and buying like health or house decor.
Oh,
I
okay.
never like broke the bank. Like I'm not thankfully don't overspend, but I become more like I want to purchase things and organize things. And in my book, I do talk
Mhm.
about like cleaning and the cupboards and
Yeah.
reorganizing. And so I really do change. And the last few times I've been manic, my boyfriend has been like, "You're different," and like something's off. I'm like, "No, I'm not. Like nothing's changed." And I almost get
I'm fine.
defensive.
I'm happy. Everything's great.
Yeah, I almost get defensive in a way, but it really helps having people around you who know you because
Hmm.
they're able to spot things before you do.
Right.
And generally, when I'm manic or depressed and I realize it, I'll look back on my life over the last week or 2 weeks and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's been going on and why didn't I catch it?" And it always happens that way where it's so subtle at first where you don't know it's coming and then you look back and you're like, "Yeah, it was happening."
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to explain because, um, for me, I'm a shopper.
Yeah.
Um, and especially if I get really focused on like buying one specific type of thing, like one summer it was yellow t-shirts. Um, I just I felt like, oh, I need all these yellow t-shirts. I'm going to start wearing yellow t-shirts for the rest of my life. And just really, and I don't notice it, like you were saying, I don't notice it right away until somebody points it out. Like my husband will say, you're kind of fixated on buying certain things and or I'll start a project that just is so random and I don't know. It's something I don't notice right away. It has to come from somebody else saying, "Hey, I need to tell you that you're doing this and this seems like a manic episode." And the hypersexuality and things like that, I always just think, "Oh, I'm feeling really good." Because it's
Do
such
you ever push back on people when they tell you like, "Oh, I think something's off." Like, do you ever be like, "No,
Um,
it's fine,"
I
or like,
used to. I used
yeah,
to. Not so much anymore because um now I kind of recognize I've been through the experience enough that I recognize the potential dangers of it.
Mm,
For like mania, the lack of sleep, or I know a lot of people like take a lot of risks and things like that, risky behavior, which could have very detrimental effects and even long lasting effects. And so I always luckily have that mindfulness, knowing that yes, right now I feel great, I'm productive, but I also know if this goes on and I don't talk to my doctor, I mean, it could just be, it's chaos. And I think we enjoy it so much. We, as in people with bipolar disorder, we enjoy it so much because it's such a stark difference from depression.
mhm.
And so it's like, no, I get out of bed every day. I'm feeling positive. I typically don't have any sort of suicidal ideation or anything during that time. And so yeah, it is really nice, but you tend to forget how bad it can actually get. So
I think one thing I have to say that I haven't thought about for a while, but when I first was experiencing symptoms of depression and mania in the beginning of my life, I was so up and down all the time, like, it was so
mm,
hard to stabilize, and I would have, like, a month of mania, and I was feeling so good and so great and going about life, and then I would drop into depression, and I just remember being so lost because I was like, "What is real? What is
right.
normal? What is reality?" And I just, like I, like, felt like I didn't understand myself, and I felt very lost because I was like, "Oh, I'm doing so good," and then I get depressed, and when you're depressed, like, for me, it makes me forget all of the good, like, it
Yeah.
really masks everything that's happened, so I really, like, felt like, "Oh my gosh, like, what is normal? I'm so messed up, like,
Hmm.
I don't even know what normal is," and my
Yeah.
therapist always says, "Well, no, like, what is normal? There's no normal,"
Right.
but, like, I'd always be like, "Oh my gosh, is this my life? Is my normal seriously gonna be, like, can't get out of bed to being really productive and really great?" Like, it was
Yeah.
really scary for me not being able to get to a stable point for long periods of time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't experience too much. I was diagnosed with bipolar 2. And so I don't experience extreme mania. Um, I've only had that I know of, I've only had one mixed episode and it was
Okay.
terrible. It
Yeah.
was just, I feel for anybody that consistently has those because I, I mean, what do you do? I mean, it's just terrible. So, luckily, so far, I've only had one of those and it was very short. And then it unfortunately just dipped into a depressive episode. So, yeah, there's another writer, maybe you've heard of her, Myra Hornbacher. Have you read her work? Her first book was about her experience with an eating disorder, and then she wrote a second book about her diagnosis with bipolar.
Okay.
And her experience, her mood changes are so dramatic. And I just when I first read the bipolar book, I was like, no, I don't want my life to be like that. And but hers, going back, she experiences a lot of mixed episodes, or at least in the book she does.
I'll have to read that. You have to send me over her name after this,
Yeah,
and I'll look into that.
yeah, I'll do it. Hers is a wild ride. I think they all are, but for some reason, I don't know if it's the writing or what, but it's like, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what's one thing that's really important that I think people kind of forget is self-care. So you do talk about it in the book, but what kinds of things help you, with self-care, and what kind of tools do you use to do that?
Yeah, I would say in general, I live a really healthy life, and I think a lot of people with bipolar disorder, they're not always fortunate enough to, like, have the stability as a child, have parents, have financial stability. And that was something I was very blessed with because
Yeah.
when I got sick, I was able to focus on myself. I didn't have kids. I don't have
Hmm.
kids. I wasn't like looking for a job or like unable to pay for my medication.
Right.
So that's huge. I think like
Yes.
if you don't have basic needs, it's really hard to even
Hmm.
take care of yourself and have self-care. Um,
Hmm.
but having like it instilled in me as a child and someone who was in sports, really like exercising, but in moderation and moving your body. Um, I would say having an eating disorder in the past, like even when I'm depressed or manic and I don't want to eat, forcing myself to eat and eat on a normal schedule. I think a big part of self care is for bipolar disorder for myself is being having kind of a normal routine. I would say
Hmm.
I struggle when there's big life changes. And
Yeah.
so getting enough sleep. I would say anything like sleep, eating, moving my body are just really big. And then something I talk about in my book is just having gratitude. And when I first started doing therapy, my therapist was like, you should keep a gratitude journal. And at
Yeah.
first I
Yeah.
was like, okay, like I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. But I wasn't taking the time to like really like think about it and feel gratitude. And so
Yeah.
it's really funny because I write down things I'm grateful for every day. And it's gotten so instilled in me that I'll be like walking down the street or driving and I'll be like, oh, like look at that sky. That's so cool. And I'll feel
Mhm.
gratitude and it's like really installed gratitude into me all the time. And I think that's a lot of the reason why I am the way I am because um, through doing all the things through self-care and then having the mindset of just like being grateful for the little things, it really does
Mhm.
help my state of mind. And I would say the hardest time for me to self-care is when I'm depressed or manic because
Mhm.
kind of my foundation kind of crumbles and
Yeah.
therapy really helps me. And I think that's a big part of self-care. And it's like, I'm talking to my therapist and he always says like, what can you control? And you can control how you take care of yourself. So
Mhm.
even when I don't want to eat or I can't sleep, like you push yourself to do those things because
Right.
that gives you stability. And I really like I'm so good at self-care, but when it comes to depression and mania, it's like I can't do it or it
Mhm.
becomes so hard. But just remembering like the little things and the little pieces of exercise and eating and sleeping, like those really do matter.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I was kind of in the similar boat in that I've always had, for the most part, I've had access to treatment
Mm,
and and medications. I've certainly struggled financially in the past, but I've always, found work that has benefits and things like that. And I often think in terms of gratitude, I think sometimes I feel lucky that I have access to medications and providers. Um, and because I cannot imagine what it would be like without that
yeah,
and where I would have ended up. And just, I'm so grateful to be able to have this because so many people don't. And I think their life ends up just getting completely disrupted all the time because of it. And then the detrimental effects of that. I'm so grateful that I don't really have to experience those things. And so, um, can I ask you a question about writing? Because I am interested in writing. What was your process of writing? Did you write every day or, how did you go about doing that?
I would say that my writing really developed over time because I journaled for so long that I
Mhm.
just got a little bit more fluent with my writing style. But when I first started writing my book, um, I just remember thinking like, I'm not gonna do this. My life is boring. Like, why would I do this? And then one day I just thought you just need to go for it. So I was sitting on the couch and I just pulled up my laptop. And when you're talking about something that's part of you and like your story, it's so easy to write about because it's truth, like, I'm writing truth,
Right.
and so I really just pulled out my laptop and started typing, and, my book took me about 8 to 9 months to, like, get
Mm,
from start to finish, which is, I've heard, pretty quick,
yeah.
but it's really just, like, when you feel like something is on your mind, just, like, pulling out a piece of paper, pulling out your laptop, and really just, like, putting it on the page. It doesn't have to be perfect,
Hmm.
but if it's something you really wanna say, like, getting it out onto paper and getting it out into the world, it really feels relieving in a way, and, I mean, you if you are serious about publishing, like, there are editors, there's people to help you, like, get things, formatted correctly, and I
Right.
wouldn't worry about that. I would just, like, just get your thoughts out onto the page, and, um,
Yeah.
there's no perfect way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've certainly made attempts at it. But I'm glad you said what you said because one of my roadblocks is thinking that it has to be perfect right out of the gate.
Mhm.
And if it's not perfect, then I'm not going to write it. And so that's
Yep.
always my roadblock, even though somebody once told me, I don't know who it was, some famous author said, good writers just write. They
Mhm.
just write, whether they're motivated or whatever, they just write and then put the pieces all together at the end. And so I've really tried to embrace that. I journal as well. So with my journaling, I just kind of try to just let things flow.
Yeah, and with
It's
my
hard
book,
to do.
I had honestly over 8 different versions where I would just write my book is kinda sectioned out by, like, short stories in a way
Mhm.
that kinda make it flow all together, but I would think
Yeah,
of something and write it down and then later move it around in the sequence of what I was trying to create, and I mean, I've had so many edits, like, it doesn't need to be perfect right away, like you were saying, it's just about, like,
mhm,
getting it out and kinda getting your thoughts, and you can always change it.
right,
Also, like, not giving yourself a timeline. I had no timeline for myself, and so that really helped because I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't need to get this done by this date."
right.
Um and for anyone who's gone through who wants to write a memoir or write about their experience, I really recommend doing it because it was so therapeutic for me to just like take my life and put it on paper. I think for the longest time I still felt bits of shame for what
Mhm.
I went through. And when I put
Yeah,
it on paper and read my story to myself, it was like, oh my gosh, I was an 18-year-old kid who
yeah.
went through all this trauma, and that was not her fault at all. And like
Mhm.
looking at myself as someone out, like a younger version who wasn't me, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
putting it on paper and reliving it, it really allowed me to grow and respect myself more. It also helped my relationship with my family
Mhm.
because a lot of what you go through with a mental illness, people see you, but they
Mhm.
don't understand why you're doing the things you're doing.
Right.
And so being very honest and putting my story on paper allowed my parents to see my perspective,
Mhm.
and it really has strengthened our relationship because initially they like saw me being manic or depressed or psychotic, and that's really scary, but they don't understand why I was that way. And so for
Right.
me to put it on paper and be like, this is my thoughts and this is how
Yeah.
I felt, it was
Yeah.
like we almost got closer because they're like, wow, that makes total sense. And I didn't know that you felt that way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important too because I struggle just talking about I'm still learning. I'm 47 and I'm still learning how to talk about my feelings. Um I don't know that we ever get to a point saying, "Yeah, I nailed that."
Yeah.
um so in therapy, I'm still gosh, I hit these little mental roadblocks and I can't get over it, and it's so hard to describe because I came from a family, there was quite a bit of trauma in my childhood, and, but my other family members, especially like my sisters, they kind of go at things like, "I'm a survivor, and I'm gonna pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm just gonna forget the past," and, I don't want to speak for them, but that's kind of the general how we kind of interact. And for me, it just doesn't work that way. I can't just pull up my bootstraps and keep going. Sometimes I need to take a step back and take care of myself and reach out to my doctor, and which I didn't do very well in the beginning. Um, and but I think you kind of have to teach other people, how you feel, and you can do that through writing, which is wonderful. And just to kind of, once you can explain your own perception and share that with others, then I think, especially family, people that are close to you, they're really, really good at identifying when you're getting into trouble too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So,
being confident in like not letting being different
mhm,
like bring shame to you, because
right.
like, for a while I didn't want to ask for help or say anything because I was always so worried about what other people thought about me.
Yeah.
And like even with writing my book, like there's gonna be people who really resonate with what I'm saying, and there's gonna be people who judge what I say. Like you
Good.
can't please everyone, and just like knowing like it's okay if not everyone understands you. I think
Mhm.
people who react poorly to like myself sharing my bipolar feelings or um I don't know. I just think like I don't know how to say it, but I people who judge you or are um not what's the word? Like just not compassionate for what you go through. I try
Mhm.
not to take that seriously because they're going through something
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
haven't addressed that. And I think going to therapy and like addressing my trauma and addressing like things that are really hard to do gives me freedom.
Mhm.
And I just hope that, other people who struggle with mental illness or any blockers or hard things in their life just know like it's good to talk about it and it's okay to lean on other people. And I really think what you said like is accurate. Like we can't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps because that's like saying, oh, you have cancer, just like
Mhm.
get over it and push
Right.
through it, be so strong and push through it and it will go away. And I think
Yeah.
people need to view mental illness that way.
Yeah. And I totally agree. It's an illness. You're sick. And you have to, I think, take a step back and kind of, you have to reorganize a lot of things. You kind of have to reorganize your schedule, your time. Especially during a depression, I kind of have to put a lot of, like, I usually have to put in a safety plan.
Mhm.
My husband and my doctor and my therapist, we all put together a safety plan for when I feel suicidal and having suicidal thoughts. And that really changes kind of the topography of my day-to-day life. And so that's not something that I can just snap out of. I'm not going to just snap out of suicidality. And it would be nice if you could, but it doesn't work that way. It takes
Yeah.
time, it takes patience, it takes people around you supporting you, and just, you have to be compassionate with yourself.
Yep.
And it's hard to do. I think it's really hard to do a lot of the times, especially, in your book, um, you describe, it seems like you're a very independent person. And even as a young person, you were independent. And, that's a huge strength for just about anybody, being independent like that. And I'm so glad that it seemed like you had a pretty good supportive, your parents, once they kind of understood what was going on, they were very supportive. Your trip, your summer vacation, oh my goodness. I just imagine the airport scene when they're bringing you back and you're running through the airport
I
and
honestly think like you could make a movie out of my story. It's
yes,
that crazy. But like
yeah,
that happens to people.
right.
And I just for me, 10 years ago, going through that, um, not being educated about mental health, it was like, oh my gosh, like what did I do and why did this happen? And like
Right.
there's no explanation for this. And so I think I really lost a lot of confidence and independence because I was like, no one is like me. No one like I was crazy. And I think like with people talking about mental health more, it's like, wow, like this is so much more common than you think.
Hmm.
And like we're only going to help each other if we talk about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was a pretty memorable
I mean, it's
scene.
you only can look back and laugh at it because otherwise, like I don't know, it is memorable. It's scary in the moment, but
Yeah.
I've accepted a lot of what I've gone through and I can look back on those scary memories and those crazy memories and just be like, that's what they are. It's something I lived through and now we're gonna keep going and
Hmm.
gotta have peace with your past. And at the
Yeah.
time, like after I'd gone through that, I think that's why I did attempt suicide is
Hmm.
because of not only the major depression, but feeling like so ashamed and like
Right.
feeling like, wow, there's seriously no one like me. And I've let my
Yeah.
family down. I've let so many people down. Like, why would anyone want me? And with depression and suicide ideation, there comes that feeling of being a burden. And I think
Mhm.
going through the psychosis was like really pushed that feeling of being a burden because it was like, what did I do? And now I'm still depressed. Like I'm really like not good. And so
Right.
um I think if there was someone to educate me to be like, other people go through this too, you're not alone, I think like it would have been a little bit easier.
Hmm. Yeah. I feel the same way. I just, in the beginning, I was diagnosed after my second suicide attempt, I think. And and you really have to learn to reach out to other people, which I wasn't very good at, is just reaching out for help. And so I kept a lot of it just hidden inside, which sounds like kind of what you did, especially in your high school years. You just keep so much of it in because well, for me, I just felt weird. Like there was something different and I'm weird and I don't want to tell anybody about how weird I am. I was like weird enough on the outside, so I definitely didn't want to share the weirdness inside. And so I think we go for so long without treatment or information because we just think of ourselves as there's something wrong with us. When really we're not weird or strange. We just have something we need to be treated for. So, yeah, yeah. I had another question. Yeah, about so one thing that I struggle with trying to explain to other people about suicide and feeling suicidal is I've been kind of judged in a way by people saying, well, it's totally under your control. I mean, this is all controlled by you. You make this decision to do that. And while I think there is some truth to it, it's really difficult to explain what's going on when that happens. So, you touched on it in the book, but do you want to explain kind of what that feels like?
I have really strong feelings about what you just said. I had a friend in college, didn't mean to be hurtful at all, but didn't know my past, didn't know that I had attempted suicide. And um, she said, people who commit suicide are very selfish
Hmm.
because they're leaving people behind to mourn. They're not thinking about anyone but themselves. And that really hurt because I want people to understand that suicide is a symptom of depression. It is the final symptom of depression. It's someone who is suicidal is very sick. It's
Yeah.
and I attempted suicide, like basically what I said earlier, but also because I just wanted my pain to stop.
Hmm.
Depression is so painful. And going back to what we said before, maybe there's not words for it for people who've never experienced it before. Um, but for someone to get to a point where they attempt their life, um, I mean, it's a really bad, dark place.
Yeah.
And for people to judge that who have never been there, that's hard for me because I don't know. I've been told that people who commit suicide are weak or looking for an easy
Hmm.
way out. And no,
Hmm.
like the people who are suicidal are some of the strongest people I know because they're spending every day fighting to spend another day here in
Right.
pain. And I want
Yeah.
people to know that because going back to your point, like suicide thoughts and ideation, it is not a choice. It's not like
Right.
we're sitting here and we're like, oh, I think of an easy way out. I'll just,
Yeah.
do this to myself because it will be easier. These thoughts are intrusive and they get forced into you every single day. Like
Hmm.
it's almost like you're trying to survive and live your life and your brain is telling you to kill yourself. Like it's
Hmm.
really like your body is fighting your brain in a way. um I feel very strongly about that. I don't do well with comments from people who say that it's a weakness or
Yeah.
say that you're being selfish because it's
Yeah.
really like they don't understand it's really a symptom of someone being severely sick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I experienced like in general, if I'm going through a depression and I have suicidal thoughts, most of the time I can say, okay, well, I can kind of adjust that thought and use my, tools, my coping tools to deal with those thoughts. And I always am open with my doctor about, hey, I've started to have these thoughts creeping in and all of that, just so he's aware of that. But when it gets like really bad and really dangerous, you get to that point where you start planning and thinking about that, then that's not that's not something that should be judged. That's like a medical emergency because when people say it's selfish, it's in the person's mind. You feel like, and maybe you felt this way too, um, you feel like you're such a burden. The safety plan I have involves a lot of people and or 4 or 5 people. And like I can't drive myself anywhere and I'm just like almost completely dependent on other people. And that's so backwards from who I am, most of the time. And but for people to say it's selfish, it's kind of like, no, you actually feel like this is the right decision because one,
Yeah,
you want to end your pain, and then two, you want to stop being a burden to
that's a
everybody.
that's a
Yeah.
scary thing about depression is it really does change your thinking and make you believe like I'm a problem and people would be better off without me or people's lives would be easier. Like for me, when I attempted suicide, I thought like my parents are so like I'm so embarrassing. Like without me, my parents will have a better life, and that's so far from the truth.
Hmm.
But when you're in that frame of mind, it's really hard to see otherwise. And so,
Hmm.
I mean, I know you said you're a very independent person, but that's great of you to have like that support system because we do need people to remind us and help us and like um I mean, it's brave to ask for help and be open and be like, I do need help. Like, can you help me do this? And I
Hmm.
believe this about myself. Like, if we talk about our suicidal thoughts, it's almost like helpful in a way, even though it's so scary and you're like ashamed of feeling that way. It's like you're getting validation from your doctors and people like this is normal, and that's not the truth.
Hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Your first hospitalization, I think it was right after the summer vacation, wasn't it? It was soon after that. I think that was your first hospitalization. Um, Seems kind of scary, but then the ones after that were at least very similar to my experience. But I think it's important to really share. I'm glad you shared your experience because I think that's a huge fear for people in seeking help
Yeah.
is, you're going to end up in, this crazy home or something. And you think of movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and, all sorts of things. You get this impression of what it means to be hospitalized. And, you know, when you get there, it's not like that at all. It's really about putting structure back into your life and keeping you safe. So, do you have any like tips or stories to share to make it to help other people understand that it doesn't have to be this scary, frightening thing. It's really people are there to help you. So how do you kind of interpret
Yeah.
that?
I honestly like when I was younger, I would think about people going to like a mental or like a psychiatric place and never coming out. Like,
Hmm.
honestly, if we were born 200 years ago, a lot of people with mental illness, what they did was they went to psychiatric hospitals and didn't come out. And I think like people still have that in their mind, like it's a scary place where with restraints and shock
Yeah.
therapy, and that's what you see in the movies. And but the truth is so far from the truth is like there are places out there that you go and you stay and they really just force you to get stability into your life. And when
Hmm.
your life is in danger, it gives you the ability to just live.
Right.
And it shouldn't be a scary thing. It shouldn't be something that's like looked down upon to have to spend time in like uh I mean a psychiatric unit. Like it honestly has saved my life more than once being put in those places.
Hmm.
And you can go voluntarily. The only time you go involuntarily is if you like attempt suicide, then they can hold you for 72 hours. But I just
Right.
really want people to know like if you have a mental illness and you're so worried about being locked away, you're not going to get locked away. Like those places, um, there's really good ones. And I even enjoyed my time there because you're not, it's not like the movies. It's really like a
Right.
place for you to find stability and not worry about the outside world and get 24/7 care for yourself.
Right.
If you are struggling and you need that care, like you should be proud of yourself for going to get that
Hmm.
because um,
Yeah.
it really is a life-saving place.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think one thing, at least one thing I understood fairly quickly during my first hospital stay is, at first I thought, I don't belong here. I'm not, a crazy person. I don't like to use the word crazy, but you know what I mean. But then you realize that the other patients are people that have jobs and they have families and they lead successful lives and all of that. It's just in this moment in time, they need a little extra help and they need to stabilize again so that they can get out and go back to living a normal healthy life. And but you just realize that the people around you, the other patients, are just like you and
Mhm.
they're just struggling at the time, and then it doesn't mean that they're going to be struggling forever. So that was really, I think, an important part of that a learning process
For
with
sure.
hospitalization.
Mhm.
Yeah. So are there any last thoughts you want to share from the book? I know I've kept you probably longer than I originally said.
No, it's
um,
okay. Um,
yeah, just any final thoughts or anything you want to share? Or
no, I really, really appreciate you having me today. And uh I would just say like I I'm happy that you're doing this episode because I think that we need to normalize talking about mental health and um like you said, when you go to a psychiatric hospital, there's so many people there, CEOs, um,
Mhm.
normal, like I keep using the word normal, but
I know,
everyday
yeah.
people struggle with mental health. And I just want it to become a normalized thing because, like we were talking about suicide, like that is the end result. And
Mm.
it doesn't have to be. And if we're
Right.
talking about it and like letting people know it's a good thing to ask for help and it's a good thing to seek treatment, um, life doesn't have to end up being a
Mhm.
tragedy for
Right.
you and the people you love. And so I really commend you for like speaking out openly about bipolar disorder and mental illness in general, because I really think like doing this and sharing our stories with the world and other people is like what's going to help break the stigma and
Mm.
um, hopefully improve quality of life of other people.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I'd like to, if you're comfortable, share kind of your social media. I can put that in the description box below, your links
Sure.
to your website. I know you have a website and
Well, I don't have a website, but I just my Instagram account, and then I do have a Facebook page,
oh, okay.
and
Okay.
then a contact email address. But yeah, I'd be happy for you to share that. I appreciate it.
Okay. Great. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for your time today. If for anybody, this is what the book looks like. Follow Kate on Instagram. Um, and as always, let me know what other kinds of videos you'd like me to cover, what topics you'd like me to cover. And but again, thank you, Kate, and I'll see everyone else in the next video.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.